following is an HCPSS TV special presentation.
Hi, I'm Brian Bassett with the Howard County Public School System. Welcome to HCPSS Insight, a live opportunity for you to interact with school system representatives. Today, we want to hear from you about the school start time models developed by HCPSS under the direction of the Board of Education and for consideration by the board. This broadcast is designed to help you better understand the work conducted by the School Start and Dismissal Time Committee, the impact that shifting start times could have on students, and help you become familiar with the various proposed models being considered by the Board of Education. This is a question and answer session in which you can submit your question in a variety of ways. The first is by Twitter. Tweet your questions using the hashtag HCPSSinsight to submit a question. Remember to include the hashtag on your tweet or it won't appear in our feed. The other way to submit a question is by emailing it to insight@hcpss.org. As questions are submitted, we'll do our best to combine similar questions so that we can cover as many as we possibly have time for. With me today are two district experts that led the School Start and Dismissal Time Committee and are here to answer your questions. Frank Eastham is the Executive Director of School Improvement and Administration, and David Ramsey is the Director of Transportation. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, so Frank, let's start with, let's just set the stage. So why do we feel the need to go down this road?
So start times for secondary students has been a part of a national discussion for a number of years. And we began discussing this again in 2013. Believe it or not, this issue was discussed as late as the early 90s because it's always been a question. Why do our high school students start earliest when we know that adolescents are most likely to get up the latest? And so the discussion began in 2013. Our superintendent, Dr. Foos, asked for an internal group to review the research, review what other jurisdictions were doing, and to give some recommendations regarding moving forward. So we did that. We went to the Board of Education, provided the results of those findings, and the superintendent and the Board of Education felt that it was necessary to go further and to gain more input and do some more research and expand the base for the input to other stakeholders. So she commissioned a school start and dismissal time committee. We have representatives from the central office as well as school-based administrators, teachers, staff, the Howard County Education Association, Rec and Parks, Columbia Association, our athletics and activities coordinator, transportation office. So we have a really wide base of stakeholders who began to look at this issue. And we know that the health and well-being of our students is very important. We also know that the sleep cycles of adolescents are different. They're different than adults and they're different than younger children. And typically, adolescents tend to go to sleep later, and it's very difficult for them to fall asleep earlier. And they their wake time tends to be later. And so the question was, can we modify the school start times in a way to accommodate those sleep patterns in a way that makes sense? And is that something that we want to do, given all of the initiatives that we have to sort through and analyze and assess? Is this one that we want to consider? And so the superintendent wants to make sure that there is no stone unturned and that we explore every impact consideration for this decision.
Yeah, and there's a number of considerations, aren't there?
Absolutely.
And maybe the guys can bring up the first slide, and this shows the considerations that the committee was evaluating. Maybe you could go through some of the considerations We see the slide there.
Sure. Well, one I've already addressed, and that is adequate sleep, making sure that our secondary students receive the adequate hours of sleep. We also wanted to look at student safety, and we know that something that we're hearing from the public is that early start times for elementary students is raising some concern due to safety. We also know that there have been several research studies which indicate that later start times for adolescents result in fewer car accidents. And so that's a safety issue as well. We also have to consider before and after care, not only from Rec and Parks and Columbia Association and other businesses within our community. We know that if we adjust the start and dismissal times for our students, that they will need to make some business decisions and they will need to adjust to those changes. And so they've been a part of this discussion as well, so that they are not caught off guard and that they can have some voice into the decisions that we're making. We know that after-school activities and athletics is a major part of the Howard County Public School System, and we know that later start times and later dismissal times will impact the athletic programs and the availability for after-school programming for students. We also know that we have recently signed a joint use agreement with Rec and Parks regarding the use of our turf fields at our high school. And the Rec and Parks, as a part of that agreement, have use of those fields for a certain number of hours each week. And so we have to make sure that we honor that agreement. And the start and dismissal time adjustments could alter that agreement. And so we might have to go back to the table and renegotiate that. So those are some of the larger impact considerations. We also know that staff work schedules would change. And everybody is in the pattern and the cycle that they're used to, and behavior change is very difficult. So it is certainly an impact consideration that both our elementary and high school staff schedules would be most impacted, as well as family life activities. We know that families are also, they have a pattern of activities and a schedule, and those would be impacted. So one of the interesting things that not everybody is considering is that a change in start times impacts every citizen in our county. It really isn't a school system impact. It is a community impact, and that's why we need to hear from everyone and gather everybody's input before a decision has been made. And I'd like to just take this opportunity to say that a decision has not been made. I assure you that the Board of Education and HCPSS staff are listening and want to hear the feedback from all of our citizens prior to making a decision.
Good, thank you. And questions are coming in, a number of them, including transportation questions. So we'll bring David into the conversation as well. I'd like to do one more thing before we move into some of these questions though, Frank, if you don't mind. And that's, let's just have a real quick look at the models being proposed.
Absolutely.
So if we can go to slide 2, that's the current model. And so if you can just sort of talk us through, we'll have the model there, we've got the schedule, and then it will have the financial impact as well. So if you can talk us through, this is the current model.
Sure. I'm actually going to have Mr. Ramsey review those because our start and dismissal times are based on a tiered bus system, and he is the expert with those schedules.
Okay, David, the current model looks this way.
Okay, our current model, all of our high schools start at 7:25, and then the next grouping of schools that we start are our middle schools, and we have 5 middle schools that start at 7:40. And they have graduated start times up through, I believe, 8:15. After that, then we have our elementary schools that start at a variety of different times, and the last one concludes at 9:25. It's important to realize that we transport approximately 40,000 students each day on 453 buses. And we believe that we have designed a very efficient system. And it was validated recently by the University of Maryland, some consultants that looked at our system where we're almost 99% efficient. So that's our current model that we have, where the earliest start time is 7:25, and then our last start is at 9:25. And of course, in the afternoon, our high schools dismiss at 2:10, and our last elementary school dismisses at 3:55.
Okay, and the current model is still under consideration. It could
Absolutely.
remain.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So the decision hasn't been made to move to one of the proposed models.
That's correct.
Okay,
Right.
good.
Right.
Okay, so let's take a look at the first model
Okay.
that was proposed, and this is Model 1.
Okay. Under models 1 and 2, they're very similar. In the similarities lie with the start of our elementary schools, and that's at 7:30. We have elementary school starting at 7:30 and then again at 8 o'clock. The only difference between models 1 and 2 is we wanted to test what it would look like to start high schools at 8:30 and middle schools at 9:15, and then switch those twos where we would start high schools at 8:30 and middle schools at 9:15.
Okay.
So they're very similar, with the exception of those the starting times for the middle and high schools. Once again, we would start elementary schools would be first in all of our models. So as we move to models 3 and 4.
Okay, and maybe we can do that as well.
Okay.
There's two. Let's stop real fast. Is there
Okay.
a financial, in the upper right-hand corner of these slides, we see the additional transportation cost. Is there a difference between Model 1 and 2 there?
There is a cost between the for each of the models that there's a difference, and the associated costs are the times in which we have our operating windows, and that's defined as when do we start our first school and when do we conclude our last school. It's important to remember that right now in the morning we have 2 hours to transport approximately 40,000 students, and so when we shrink that model, or shrink the number of hours or time that we have to deliver our students, our buses don't have the same opportunities as they would for a larger window. Many of our buses, they do a high school run, a middle school run, an early elementary, and then a late elementary run. If we compress that time window, then the buses just will not have an opportunity to do 3 and 4 trips. Rather, we're forecasting that the buses will be able to do 2 or 3 trips.
Okay. Yes, Frank.
I'd like to note on the cost that our viewers are seeing on the screen, and that is that those are transportation costs only,
Yes.
and those are contingent upon current programming across the system. So it doesn't include fuel charge changes, it doesn't include any programming changes if there were to be decisions made regarding moving programs from one location to another, and those costs are only in the amount of transportation costs increase.
Okay. So there could be additional costs elsewhere.
Yes, we anticipate that there are going to be some costs. We anticipate that we're going to need our lights on for the field for longer hours in the evening. So we're going to see some utility costs. As I said, we have a joint use agreement with Rec and Parks, and so currently there's a percentage that Rec and Parks will pay for replacement of those fields and a percentage that the school system will.
Okay.
If Rec and Parks gets to use those fields for fewer hours, then we may have to absorb the cost to adjust for the amount of time that we will need to use the fields.
Okay.
Also, most of our buildings are used by community groups in the evening for athletics and other activities. And so if we have later start times for some of our secondary schools, then there would be a reduced number of hours that the community groups would be able to rent our facilities. So we could see a slight reduction in revenue.
Okay.
While we don't get a lot of revenue from that facility use, there is a small amount that does come in, and so that would be impacted.
I encourage our viewers to head to the school system website, www.hcpss.org, and all of the models are detailed right there. So take a look at the models and the comparison. We have a comparison chart as well there. If you have questions, be sure to submit them at insight@hcpss.org or tweet them using hashtag HCPSSinsight. And I want to get into the questions because we have a lot coming in.
Okay.
And so I'll just go in the order in which they're coming in and they're being fed to me. One of the concerns is the safety of elementary school students that walk to school if elementary schools start early. And in this tweet, their opinion is that young children shouldn't have to walk to school in the dark. Is that one of the considerations of the committee?
Absolutely. That's been a consideration for all levels, whomever we have start first. One of the interesting things about bell times is somebody must start first. And the Board of Education at the April 28th meeting asked that middle and high schools not start before 8:15, and so that caused us to move the elementary to the earlier time. Other jurisdictions, for instance Fairfax County, they moved their middle schools to the early start time. And as Mr. Ramsey mentioned, there needs to be a window of time in which students can be delivered. And the shorter that window is, the more buses that are needed and the greater cost. And so early on in this process, when we looked at some models that had both the elementary, middle, and high starting at times that were closer together, the costs were pretty significant. And the Board of Education obviously was concerned about that we have limited funds, and there are other priorities within the system. And so they have wanted us to look for efficiencies and look for ways to reduce the cost for us to consider later start times, and that is what Mr. Ramsey did by enlisting the support of the University of Maryland to ensure that we are scheduling our bus routes in the most efficient manner. And he really gave them a problem and said, here's the problem, help us solve it. And so some of our best research professors in the area, along with their students, took on this cause and began the work. And so absolutely the safety of our students is an impact consideration that we are hearing and we are expressing as we move through this process.
And so beyond that, we've had several emails that have come in the past few minutes from parents with concerns over elementary school starting early. But these concerns are also regarding their sleep and their well-being. So if we're swapping elementary for high school as the early start time, are we just moving the problem to younger children?
Sure. Well, one of the pieces of information that we received fairly early on was that the sleep patterns of younger children tended to be different than our older children. Some people on our committee and some of the citizens in the community said, well, my 5-year-old already gets up early, and why don't we get that student to school when they're most alert and have them start earlier. Because that's when they are most alert. And so that has been part of the discussion as well. Clearly, there's not agreement across the whole community on that, and ultimately we'll have to share the feedback that we get prior to making any decision or recommendation.
And have elementary school parents been part of those considerations? Has their voice been part of the process?
Absolutely. We have received over 6,000 feedback forms online from citizens, and we had over 70 people attend the first forum last Wednesday. We're having our second one this Wednesday, and I would say out of the 70 parents and community members who showed up, by far there were more elementary parents there than all other groups.
And just to clarify, if you'd like to participate in the forums, head to hcpss.org for a schedule, because this program will be re-aired a few times. So this Wednesday may be different for you depending on when you're watching. How about the makeup of the committee? Parents as part of the makeup of the committee?
Yes. We had multiple parents from different levels of
including
elementary, middle, and high on the committee, and they provided input along with the other stakeholders.
And I'm going through questions. Okay, sure. So just a little bit further, did the committee find any research that spoke to the impact that early start times has on each level, high school, middle, elementary?
Most of the discussion has been around secondary students, so middle and high school, and it really began with high school students, and in the past several years has moved to middle school students. And what they have found, there have been several research studies conducted, and there is some indication that later start times help with tardiness to school. There's not much research that says that it impacts attendance that much, but definitely tardiness to school is positively impacted with later start times. And that's even more pronounced in our students who are coming from homes, our students who struggle the most in school. Those students are impacted more positively with a later start time. There's mixed reviews on academic achievement.
Okay.
There are some studies that say there's a positive impact, some studies that says there's no impact, and some studies that say they are mixed impact. Regarding safety, as I mentioned earlier, there are a few studies that talk about the reduction in automobile accidents for high school students with later start times.
See, but that sounds backwards to me, because, and maybe David can address this, because we'd be putting high schoolers out more during rush hour, right? Yet we're seeing less accidents. Why might that be the case?
Well, in Howard County, there haven't been any studies that have been conducted, but our rush hour in Howard County pretty much starts at 6:30 and concludes shortly before 9 o'clock. And as we've shared with our task force members as well as other community members, as we look at the impact of bus service with the various start times, we are not too sure what that will look like at this point. The only thing I can share is as folks are going to and from work, you know that there's certain roadways that are very, very busy and become very slow, and it has an impact on their commute to work.
I live near Route 100.
Oh, you do, so you're well aware of it. We have Route 100, Route 40, Route 1, and obviously if there are any traffic incidences on any of the roadways, then we have the overflow into our other roadway systems.
Right.
So, no, it's a very complicated problem, and as we shared with the task force, as well as the other members, the models that we've presented are just mathematically based. It's just, can it get from point A to point B? It does not factor in the various fluctuations in traffic.
Okay.
No, it does not do that.
I'd like to also mention, Brian, that regarding sleep, the research has shown in a couple studies that for secondary schools that start after 8 o'clock, that students report sleeping how many ever minutes the delay is, the start time is delayed, that many minutes of extra sleep. And so if the delay is 30 minutes, they are indicating that they got an additional 30 minutes of sleep. For schools that start around 8:30, the research has indicated that students get about 45 more minutes of sleep.
Because a lot of the thought process is we're just shifting the sleep patterns, right? If we start later, end later, they're getting to their extracurriculars, and then homework later, they'll get to bed later.
Right. And so one of the things that is, I've learned a lot in this process, not just about the input from the community, but also reading the research and reading the studies that are out there. And there's a lot of blogs, there's a lot of literature, but there's not as much research. So getting to the research that really looks at this issue has taken some time over the last couple of years. And one of the things that I've learned, it's more about the sleep cycle and the wake cycle than it is the number of hours of sleep.
We're talking about like REM.
Exactly.
Sleep patterns, those sort of things?
They're called circadian rhythms.
Okay.
And as I said earlier, high school students, their bodies biologically tend to start shutting down later than other people. And they tend to wake later than other people. So it's just not about what time they get to bed and what time they wake up. We could have students who try to go to bed at 9:30 or 10 o'clock.
Okay.
But their body is just still.
So it's a quality of sleep issue.
Exactly. Their body is not winding down, and so they're not getting the quality of sleep. And so it's about dealing with those circadian rhythms as well. And that's some feedback that we get, where everything will just be shifted. And that's not what the literature has indicated happens like we might think.
Okay. Let's get back to an email that came in. And David, maybe you can address this, and maybe we can bring up Model 3 again on the slides.
Okay.
The question is, why does Model 3 exist? It costs over $4 million more than Model 2, but only differs by 15 minutes in start and end times.
So Model 3, we're transitioning from Models 1 and 2, where we're starting 15 minutes later. And believe it or not, the 15 minutes has a huge impact on cost. Once again, it gets back to it's a model allocation, where how many trips can you insert into the operational window. And so the difference between Model 3 from 1 and 2 is that we're losing that additional 15 minutes, and that has the impact of the additional equipment that would be needed to fulfill the requirements under that model.
And David, maybe you can clarify, when we look at the cost projections, the increased cost projections for each model, when you break that down, there were a few things in there I was hoping you could help us understand. The first one is routing software. That's one of the expenditures. What is the routing software?
We currently leverage routing software, but it's we are interested in a more robust routing package, one that could handle in the future any cost projections and optimization. Right now, as I'd mentioned, that we had reached out to the University of Maryland, and our current software package doesn't support an optimization module. So we believe that we would have to research other routing software solutions out there, but we feel that it's time for us to leverage technology to its fullest extent. The other pieces that are within the model include a routing validation.
Yeah.
It's really important to remember we've had our current model for over 30 years, and I've talked before about the commute to and from work, and I believe that residents have adjusted their commutes to reflect the various opening and closing of schools. I think that anyone that has passed by a high school at either the start or dismissal, they know that they're going to probably be sitting in traffic. Similarly, for many of our elementary schools, many parents are making the decision to drive their kids to school, and that obviously has an impact on the neighborhood roadways. So we felt that it's extremely important that on a day in which school is closed, that all of our bus drivers would do a practice run to see if what the computer results have produced will work or not. And so that is, we're projecting approximately $150,000 for that cost. The other is a routing validation. Once again, this is mathematically based, and it's simulations. And so if we discover through our practice runs that maybe this combination of high, middle, and elementary trips won't work, there may be a possibility that we have to add additional buses. And so that creates a buffer for us in the event.
Is that the reserve?
That's the reserve. Yes, that's the reserve for additional buses that we would have to put out.
And so an email following up on that response just came in, asking what the process is to purchase new software. How do we make sure that the purchase software fulfills our needs?
Well, we would have to put together the requirements and then put out a request for proposal, and then we would pull in a team of school system staff. So in addition to folks within our office, we would reach out to our technology office and our accountability office and other stakeholders, and we would do a comprehensive review of the proposals that were submitted to make sure that it meets the needs of our school system, that it leverages our current technology and interfaces with our current technology. And through the committee, we would then score each of the software programs and then make a recommendation and submit it to the Board of Education.
David, we'll just keep rolling. Look, why can't we simply add more buses to ensure everybody starts later?
We can. There's a cost associated with that, though. As Frank had mentioned, we did look at starting our schools in a very compressed operational window, but we discovered that there were a large number of additional vehicles that would be required to meet those needs. The other thing very important to remember, and I shared this with our Board of Education, we are currently at a critical shortage of bus drivers. And this is not just a problem within Howard County, rather it is a national problem. So folks often ask, well, why is that? It's my belief because we have a very strong economy and the nature of our job. We just cannot, there's a limited pool of qualified candidates that would become school bus drivers. So we could certainly issue 100 contracts tomorrow, but could we fill those 100 seats on our buses? And we would find that to be very, very challenging.
Okay. If you'd like to get in, make sure you do. Insight at hcpss.org. We're on Twitter at hashtag HCPSS Insight. Blah. All right, let's keep going. Frank, some of the questions that come in may be better directed to the Board of Education, decisions that they'll be making, but I want to make sure we're asking questions that people are submitting to us. So here we go.
Sure thing.
The money. If we were to move to another model, there are significant costs even at the smaller end in the budget times that we're looking at. Where does that come from? Where do we see those dollars available?
Sure. Each and every year in the budget process, we have to lay out all of the initiatives that we would like to implement, and the school system staff make some decisions about what to move forward. And the Board of Education to the superintendent. The superintendent submits her requested budget, proposed budget to the Board of Education. The Board of Education thoroughly looks at all of those recommendations and then also may want to make some modifications before they present their budget to the county executive. And so that's why we have that process. So every year we have to look at what initiatives do we want to implement, which ones can we afford, which ones can we prioritize, and those decisions are made collectively by staff and ultimately and the superintendent and ultimately by the Board of Education. So it's merely a decision of priorities and how we want to spend the money that we have.
Good, thank you. That question actually came in a few times already today. Sticking with transportation costs, David. What would be the impact of HCPSS owning our own fleet of buses? Other counties do that. So what would the financial considerations be, and then even other considerations like bus driver shortages and other things?
If there were a definitive model to follow within school bus transportation, then school districts throughout the United States would follow that model. Right now, it's almost a 50-50 split of insourcing or outsourcing. My experience has been on this particular model, it wouldn't make a difference if we insourced or outsourced. Once again, we have a definitive amount of time to transport our students, and so whether you're a publicly operated or you're a contract operated system, the asset allocation doesn't change.
Okay.
It simply doesn't change.
Okay. Okay. 4 models were presented. Why the 4? Why not other variations on the start times outside of 7:30 and 9:15 a.m.?
Well, I'll answer part of that question, and David can take it from there. We have proposed, we've taken before the Board of Education several sets of models to review and to assess. And at the last opportunity that we had to do this, previously none of the models that we had developed were selected. And there was robust discussion about what is it that they were looking for when we look at modifying the start and dismissal times for students.
And this is the Board of Education?
Yes, okay. And like everyone in the community, they would love for students to begin school at the optimal time for all students, which is a compressed window. So their discussion reflected that in a perfect world, they would like for no student to start early. But as we began to look at the different options available, as Mr. Ramsey said, we need about 2 hours to take students to school, and about an hour and 45 minutes to take them home. Okay. And so if we start later at 8 o'clock or 8:30. If we take 2 hours down the road, that's about how much time we need. So if the first school starts at 8 o'clock, let's say, then the last school would start at 10 o'clock. If we are going to utilize a similar, although somewhat increased cost pattern to what we have now.
So why don't we Montgomery County shifted all start times, correct me if I'm wrong, 20 minutes, I believe.
Yes.
Right.
Why is that not one of the models being considered?
Because that doesn't solve any of the issues
Okay.
that were brought forward for adjusting the start and dismissal time. Our late start advocates who are looking at sleep and health and wellness for our students, 20 minutes isn't even a full sleep cycle. So it didn't satisfy the needs that they were bringing forth with wanting to start schools later. And it just shifts the early start times 20 minutes, and then the elementary or whoever starts last, it shifts that 20 minutes. And what Montgomery County found was that it really didn't please anyone when they did that. There was a lot of pushback, and it really impacted the traffic. And so it took months for the traffic patterns to sort themselves out because it shifted a lot of school traffic right on the roads at the same time. That rush hour was really in high gear.
And through Twitter, we had a concern, maybe we can address it this way. These models that have been presented to the Board of Education, are they set in stone? Will the Board of Education be choosing one of those 4 models as they are, or keep the current model, or could there be variations through this process to those models and maybe even others considered?
Sure. The Board of Education can make a decision to request us to modify any of the models that we put forth. So they could make recommendations that would give us a different set of parameters, and we would take those parameters and we would first have the transportation office run new models, and then we would take those models to our committee and get feedback, and then I'm sure that we would go back to the public and look for additional feedback on those models.
Good. I just want to address the concern that all this is a formality. The surveys, the forums, a decision has been made. It hasn't.
It has not. None of this is a formality. The board and the superintendent have insisted from the very beginning that they want to move slowly and get all of the feedback that we need in order to make an effective decision. In some other jurisdictions who have implemented this full scale, they have taken up to 3 years to study it and to implement it. And the feedback that we receive from all of our constituents is that the best thing that you can do is take time to hear from the citizens about what they want.
So regarding feedback from the citizens, a survey, you mentioned that there were over 6,000 responses last time you checked. So what are we going to do with what comes back from the survey? One of the questions is do you want to keep the current model, or do you choose model 1, 2, 3, 4? Will we look at that as is, or will we look at it as keep the current model or change, and then start to look at the changes that way?
So on the online version of the feedback form, there's an opportunity to provide written comments, which can capture what citizens might be wanting other than the current model or the 4 proposed models. At our forums, we did add other, so that if someone did not like any of the current or the 4 models, they could select other. And there's also a question at the table facilitation which asks what matters most to you about start and dismissal times. And we've asked our facilitators to capture from anyone who selects other, what is it that you would be looking for other, and what is important to you?
I want our viewers and the citizens of Howard County to be sure that this isn't, so it's not American Idol voting style, right? We're not
That's
voting
correct.
on what's going to occur, because the concern is, 40% may want to keep the current model, and then the other 60 want variations of other models.
Correct.
And so it's not the highest vote getter.
That's
is moved
correct.
Moved on.
It's what the participants have an opportunity to do is to select their preferred model. It is not a vote. as you said. It is a feedback tool that will be synthesized and will be distilled, and we'll give that information to the Board of Education. And they'll have access to all of the raw data as well.
It's one data point.
Yep.
Well, it's thousands of data
Right.
points, but and I think that also speaks to the concern that came in about community members being able to fill the survey out multiple times. So it's still, it's not the highest. It's not the highest choice. Highest votes wins.
Correct.
It's just a consideration.
That's correct.
Okay, good. So a concern that has come in multiple times today is about it's from elementary school parents and about younger siblings getting home first. A lot of older siblings are babysitters in the afternoons after school. Is that one of the considerations of the committee? What kind of conversations did we have about that?
From the beginning,
Yeah.
that issue came up, and we discussed and identified early on that if we moved elementary start times to begin prior to middle or high school, that would remove that availability for parents to use older siblings to pick up younger children from elementary school or even high school students meeting middle school students at home. And so that has been, from the beginning, identified impact consideration that we have communicated.
So the purpose, one of the primary purposes of altering school start times, particularly for our secondary students, is for better sleep. Better quality of sleep, we think, would translate, or the assumption is it would translate to academic performance, right? Are there other measures, and the question came, are there other measures that we could take that may impact it, not school start time related? For instance, homework load.
Right.
Could that be a consideration, assuming if we kept the current model?
That certainly addresses the number of hours that a student could technically be in bed. And part of the beauty of this feedback process has been our students have spoken out.
Yeah.
And they have talked about homework, and they've talked about the length of homework assignments and the value of homework assignments. And I heard very clearly at our forum, we had about 8 students there, and they want us to explore that. And they want us to make sure that teachers are assigning homework that is absolutely needed, that's valuable, and that will enrich the learning that they are receiving during the school day. So certainly if we modify, if we analyze and modify the way in which students are given homework, that could impact the amount of hours that students have to sleep. Again, that will not impact the rhythms, the circadian rhythms of our adolescents. So that's still one issue that really requires an adjustment in the actual time of start time. But yes, those are some things, regardless of whether we make shifts to the start and dismissal time, we'll have that valuable feedback, and that will not be lost.
Good.
We will be working with our curriculum office as well as school administration to make sure that we share that feedback with our principals and with our teachers, that students are questioning the value of some of the homework assignments that they're getting.
Good. So the conversation of what's best for the well-being of our students doesn't end with school start times.
Absolutely not.
Good. That's important. So we've got about 10-ish minutes left. If you'd like to get in on this conversation, make sure to email your question to insight@hcpss.org or through Twitter at #HCPSSinsight. If you weren't able to get in live during this broadcast, maybe you saw it on demand after the fact, and you have a question, a follow-up question, you can certainly go to hcpss.org and fill out the survey. You can find information there. Or you could email us at insight@hcpss.org, and we'll get back to you. Okay, continue moving. So maybe we can step back to something we responded to earlier, because concerns are still coming in throughout our discussion from elementary school parents about the impact that going to school early will have on younger children. So maybe you can recap some of the considerations by the committee that were addressed in creating these models.
Well, the purpose for the committee was to gather information.
Yeah.
We were not a recommendation-based committee. We were merely gathering information that we would share with the superintendent and that we would share with the Board of Education. So our role was not to address or solve considerations that would come up, but rather to provide information about what areas were impacted and needed to be considered in making this decision. And so I would like to say that on the 7:30 and the 7:45 start time for elementary, that is half of our elementary. So if on the models 1 and 2, 20 of our elementary, approximately 20 of our elementaries would start at 7:30, the other 20 would start at 8 o'clock, as well as on the models 3 and 4, half of our elementaries would begin at 7:45 and half would begin at 8:15. There's no way to get around the fact that elementary schedules and high school schedules are the most impacted in the recommendations for the 4 models that are put forth. And so that is information that we are gathering and will be sharing.
What are we seeing the impact? You mentioned it earlier, but we haven't talked much about it. The impact of after-school activities, particularly sports, sports schedules, and even further when they get into playoffs and they're playing out-of-county games, either earlier in the season or during playoff time. Have we looked at that impact?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Our coordinator for athletics and activities and our managers have met with a group of AAMs, athletic activities managers, and gotten feedback, as well as surveyed all of our AAMs to get some additional feedback. Also, we have developed a side-by-side comparison to what time practices would begin and what time contests would begin with each of the start times for high school, 7:25, 8:30, and 9:15. And we're looking at the impact that would have on practices, on daylight for practices, the use of facilities, as well as the use of our fields. And regarding other systems, there are several systems that we play who already have later start times for contests.
Okay.
So the contests in some degree with out-of-county schools would be less impacted than the ones in county.
Okay. David, we're just cleaning up a few of the questions that remain. There's a large range of increased costs between the various models. Why such a big range? Especially if we're looking at if they're flipped, right? If elementary is just going early, but it's the same times, why is there a difference in cost?
Well, one of the models we looked at, it had the least impact, and that was pretty much flipping everything that we currently have. So the high schools would start at 9:15 and then the elementary school at the beginning. There are a lot of different variables when we're designing our bus routes, from obviously the start and dismissal times of each of the schools to the length of our bus rides. Typically our high school bus runs out in the western region are longer than our high school runs in our more densely populated areas, and we would define that as Columbia and the Savage communities and along the Route 1 corridor as well. And so when you look at how you place the various schools and what their associated times are and the trips, that has an impact on the output of the simulation software that we're using. In general, our elementary school trips are the shortest, and you have to go back to the school attendance areas. We have 42 or 41 elementary schools, soon to be 42 elementary schools, and they tend to be smaller schools. The next size would be our middle school, and then final with our high school. So to put that in numbers, we have approximately 240 high school trips, approximately 280 middle school trips, and over 400 elementary trips. So it's often asked, why do we have early middle schools? Well, it gets back to trying to optimize our bus runs. So of the 327 general ed buses that we're using, well, only 240 of those are being used for high school. So we backfill the remainder with our early middle schools, because ideally, to optimize the use of the equipment, you want all of your buses running at the same time. So we want to start with 327 and we want to end with 327. So when we put in the various school times under each of the models, we obviously had the how long each of the bus runs were, and depending upon the regions, it had the impact of whether a bus could do 2 trips or 3 trips. And in some cases it could do 4 trips. But we found those to be in our centrally located areas where the bus runs are relatively short in nature, where we're quickly picking up a lot of students, filling up the buses and then bringing them into the school, as opposed to Glenelg High School, Manor Woods Elementary School, Lisbon Elementary School, Glenwood Middle School, where those trips typically are much longer.
Frank, is there any research that shows the financial impact on families in the models where elementary school students start first? Is there any research that talks about the impact for families in after-school care? Some of the concerns are about students getting out of school at 2:15. If there's not an older sibling, they may need after-school care in some form. So there's even a question that came in through Twitter about could that impact buyers' attraction to Howard County, having to have a parent home at 2:15. Is there anything out there that talks about that cost impact?
I haven't seen any research that talks about the cost impact or the other impacts of additional daycare or before and after school care that is needed. Anecdotally, we're hearing that, and we're hearing for some families who have 3 children who would need aftercare for their children. That could be a couple $100s for each student, and so it could be a fairly substantial cost for those families.
Sure.
For other families, we're hearing that it prevents the need for split daycare now, so they only need daycare at one time of the day because in the morning they're not going to need daycare.
Okay.
And I think the important thing to remember is that what's a strength for one family could be a negative consideration for another family. And we have a lot of diversity here in Howard County in our families and our family structures. And so the Board of Education has a tough job and really coming up with a decision that reflects the belief and values and meets the needs of our system as a whole. And so when we conclude this, everyone may not get what they want. But what I can assure you is that the Board of Education has studied this tremendously. Our superintendent has said that she wants every stone unturned as we look at this to determine that we are making the best decision for our students and the best decision for our citizens in Howard County.
And we'll leave it there. Actually, let's do that. Let's talk about the process moving forward. What happens next?
Well, we have 4 forums every Wednesday up until December 21st, and those are regionally located. We did add one on December 21st at Hammond High School because we had not had a Columbia school in the mix. We had Howard High School, which was close, but we got some feedback from citizens who said we would like one additional one.
Good.
And so we did add that. All of that information will be synthesized, and we have a lot of work to do over winter break to prepare for the board report, which will be given to the board. There will be a public hearing, and then the board is slated to make a decision in February, but they can make shifts and changes as they deem appropriate to that timeline.
Great. Guys, thank you.
Okay.
More information can be found at www.hcpss.org. That's all the time that we have today. First, I'd like to thank all of you who joined us and submitted a question. I'd also like to thank Frank and David for taking the time to ensure that the Howard County community is well informed of the issue and has a voice in the decision. Finally, thank you to the outstanding team of people we have working here behind the scenes of HCPSS Insight. Please visit the website at www.hcpss.org, because there you'll find more information around the committee's work, including the numerous factors that went into developing the models and a comparison chart that will help you view the models side by side. So on behalf of Frank Eastham, David Ramsey, and everybody that participated on HCPSS Insight, I'm Brian Bassett. Thank you for joining us.